Being able to trade down within tiers at positions while still maintaining production is by far the easiest way to add draft capital or more assets just in general to your roster. And that is going to be the point of this series throughout the entire offseason. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to show you guys stats from two similar players, but one is valued at a premium in startup drafts or trades, and the other is valued more as like the generic version. And then we're going to break it all down. So first up, we have a running back comparison, and our premium running back is currently 23 years old, and in 13 games played last year has averaged per game 16.9 rush attempts, 3 targets, 2.3 receptions, 84.9 total yards, 0.4 touchdowns, 13.1 fantasy points per game, and totaled 9 top 24 weeks, 4 of which were top 12. And our generic running back is 24 years old, and in 12 games played last year has averaged per game 17.1 rush attempts, 1 target, 0.75 receptions, 71.4 total yards, 0.25 total touchdowns, 9.4 fantasy points per game, and totaled 4 top 24 weeks, 1 of which was top 12. And then to further feed the comparison, both of these running backs are second-year players who both came from schools in the SEC. Both are currently playing for teams who finished last in their divisions last year, but they do have reason for hope for 2023 and beyond. If you haven't guessed it yet, our premium player is Dameon Pierce, currently valued as RB18 in August ADP, and the generic running back is Brian Robinson, currently valued as RB37. So why the discrepancy here? Well, just from the per game averages, it's pretty clear why there's such a difference in ADP between the two. Pierce just flat out outproduced Robinson last year by almost 4 fantasy points per game. There is also the aspect that Dameon Pierce is a whole year younger, despite both of them being rookies last year. Plus, Pierce is essentially the only running back in his backfield. He has no competition for touches, whereas Robinson is competing with Antonio Gibson in that Commanders offense. And those are all very valid reasons for almost a 4-round difference in ADP. So why would I advise trading down from Dameon Pierce to Brian Robinson? And it really comes down to, at the base of all of this, they are essentially the same player. They are both grinding, bruising running backs built to carry the workload between the tackles, and they both offer minimal upside in the receiving game. I honestly believe that they are both very similarly talented running backs, and I think that an argument can be made that Robinson is more talented than Dameon Pierce in many facets of the running game. I mean, let's not forget that he was drafted first last year in the 3rd round. Dameon Pierce fell to the 4th. Let's also not forget that Brian Robinson ran a faster 40 at a heavier weight than Dameon Pierce. And again, don't forget that Brian Robinson actually showcased more receiving ability at Alabama than Pierce did at Florida, catching 10 fewer passes in his final season at Alabama than Pierce had in his entire 4-year career. And then you look at both of their situations heading into 2023, and all offseason, all I've heard is that CJ Stroud is going to make this Texans offense better, which is going to be good for Pierce because he'll have more scoring opportunities, yada, 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 which I'm not saying is necessarily wrong, but if that's your argument for Dameon Pierce, then that has to apply to Brian Robinson too, on a bigger scale, because this Commanders offense looks legit under Sam Howell and new offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy. I don't want to overweight numbers from the preseason this year, but in 2 games played, Dameon Pierce has only accumulated 45 yards on 11 carries and has yet to see a single target. In Robinson's 2 games, he totaled 37 yards on 8 carries, so essentially identical numbers on a per game basis, but he did haul in all 5 of his targets in the receiving game. If that usage holds going into the regular season, Brian Robinson is going to be a solid RB2 for your lineup, which is essentially also what Dameon Pierce is on your roster as well. And that's the whole point of this video, is finding players who produce similarly, but at very different price tags. According to our trade analyzer right now, the difference between the two is the 2.01 in Superflex leagues, or like the 109 to 110 in 1 quarterback leagues, which is a decent player coming back to you. If you're competing, that could be Keenan Allen or DeAndre Hopkins or James Conner or maybe Darren Waller. If you're rebuilding, that could be Elijah Moore or Pat Freiermuth, or maybe you squeak out a Zach Charbonnet or Dalton Kincaid on top, or even push that asset down the road a little bit, just make it a 2025 or 2026 first-round pick. There are quite a few options here to go from one RB2 to another, but getting something of quality coming back to you with Brian Robinson. Next, we have a quarterback comparison, and our premium quarterback just turned 30 years old, and over his last 17 games has averaged per game a 67% completion percentage on 34 pass attempts, 243 passing yards, 2.2 passing touchdowns, 3.7 rush attempts per game, 19.2 fantasy points per game, and totaled 16 top 24 weeks, 9 of which were top 12. And our generic quarterback just turned 35 years old, and over his last 17 games has averaged per game a 66% completion percentage on 38 pass attempts, 267 passing yards, 1.7 passing touchdowns, 1.8 rush attempts, 18 fantasy points per game, and has totaled 16 top 24 weeks, also 9 of which were top 12. And then to further feed this comparison, both quarterbacks play in the NFC. They both have an elite wide receiver on their team, valued as top 5 dynasty wide receivers, and both of their teams cut their RB1 of many years during this past offseason. Now, those extra bits of information probably gave it away, but if you haven't guessed it yet, our premium player is Dak Prescott, currently valued as QB 11 in August ADP, and our generic player is Kirk Cousins, valued as QB 18 in August ADP. So again, why the discrepancy here? Well, even though the general community seems to really just dislike Dak Prescott for whatever reason, the general community also just dislikes Kirk Cousins even more as like the most unsexy and boring quarterback option in the entire NFL to have for fantasy.
Big Kirko wakes up dripping like this.
Well, let's be honest. There's no reason that these two should be so far apart outside of like the 5-year age gap between the two, because in the last 5 years, they have each produced as fantasy QB1s basically every single year, with 2019 being the largest non-injury difference between the two in Dak's massive breakout season in his first year with Kellen Moore. But that leads me right into my main argument that Dak no longer has Kellen Moore. And if you look at his numbers prior to getting Moore as an offensive coordinator, there's really nothing special going on. Prior to last season, Dak's 3 fewest seasons in yards per game were the 3 seasons prior to Kellen Moore, and it's really not even that close, averaging at least 270 yards per game with Kellen Moore compared to not even breaking 250 without him. His yards per attempt drops without Moore, his touchdown percentage drops, his completion percentage drops. It all falls down to just a lower level that's closer to league average than it is top 10 or even top 5. Kirk Cousins, on the other hand, has just been Mr. Steady Eddie basically almost his entire career, even dating back to his Washington days in 2015, 2016, and 2017. He's literally thrown for at least 4,200 yards and 25 touchdowns in 5 of his last 7 seasons, and that's raised to 4,230 touchdowns in 4 of his 5 seasons with the Minnesota Vikings. He already has Justin Jefferson, which is fantastic. They added TJ Hawkinson last year, great, and then they drafted Jordan Addison in the first round this year of the NFL draft, which is all absolutely amazing for Kirk Cousins. Add in that this is now year 2 in Kevin O'Connell's offense with a higher focus on the pass game now that Dalvin Cook is gone, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised at all if Kirk Cousins led the league in passing yards and finishes top 5 in passing touchdowns. We're talking almost 5,000 total yards, 35 plus touchdowns. I don't care that he doesn't run as much. Those are Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert level passing numbers, and it's easily a top 10 fantasy quarterback, if not even borderline top 5.
You like that?
According to our trade analyzer, the difference between the two is about the 107 to 108 in Superflex leagues, which means that you could literally get Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, or Zay Flowers, or any veteran valued around there just to trade down from Dak to Kirk Cousins. Maybe that's a little bit too high. Who's adding a high-end rookie wide receiver just to move up from Cousins to Dak? I get it, but you could still maybe pull away Amari Cooper, Jahan Dotson, Christian Kirk, Dallas Goedert at the tight end position. If you're competing, maybe look at running backs like Aaron Jones or Joe Mixon. If you're rebuilding, you get Dalton Kincaid, George Pickens, Zach Charbonnet, or again, a 2025 or 2026 first. There are a ton of options here to move off of Dak down to Kirk Cousins, who honestly may even be an upgrade for 2023 for fantasy football, and you're getting a really good asset on top of that. But I made videos like this almost every single month since the offseason started, so if you want to check out June's version of this video, which is still very applicable today, then you can check that video out right up here.